Today we are going to discuss late childhood, physical and cognitive development, and this is the stage which is going to occur between 7 to 8 years until 12 to 13 years before the onset of puberty. As with the onset of puberty, the adolescence is going to start. We will discuss that after discussing late childhood. When we are talking about and discussing the physical changes and the health, then we talk about the body growth and the changes. As you can see on your screens as well, that there are few figures which are going to change as the 2 to 3 inches of the growth in the 5 to 7 pound growth per year. It is going to vary according to different genders, and their head and waist development is also going to be differentiated. And when we discuss about the muscle mass and the strength, which is going to increase, and the baby fat decreases. When we talk about the baby fat is that when we see some chubby and little babies which seem so cute to their parents and to everyone around, but actually that baby fat is not that much of a healthy thing, because if that is going to persist even in their late childhood, that is going to create some sort of problems. But in this stage, usually the muscle mass and their strength in the body is going to increase, and baby fat usually decreases. And now the boys are getting more muscle cells and are more stronger than the girls, because girls are having more of the fat cells in their body. Then when we discuss the development in the brain areas, then the volume of the brain is now going to stabilize, as the new connections within that brain structure are going to establish more and more complex structures are being formed, because now the child is going to use more of his complex cognitive and mental functioning, and in the structure there are not going to be very much of the significant changes. But there is going to be some sort of prominent changes in the prefrontal cortex, which is going to be involved in their reasoning and improved attention and higher cognitive functioning. Then when we talk about the activation of some brain areas, then there is increase in some and there is decrease in some. There are new connections being formed, as we have talked earlier about that and discussed that earlier. And there are the synaptic pruning is going to take place, which is that the new synaptic connections are going to be formed, and those which have not been used for so long, those connections are going to dissolve and disappear as well. When we talk about the motor development, there are two different skills which we discuss in the motor development of the late childhood: the gross motor skills and the fine motor skills. The gross motor skills are those motor skills which involve the person's body and the functioning and the physical movement and the grasping and the strength in doing that thing and the coordination in that. So gross motor skills are going to be more smoother and more coordinated in this stage, and boys are usually high on gross motor skills. And when we talk about the fine motor skills, the more precise, focused, and the things people used to do with more precision are the fine motor skills, and they are going to be heightened in the females as well. The increased myelination of the central nervous system is used to be the cause of the improvement in the fine motor skills during this stage. When we discuss the gross motor skills and fine motor skills, gross motor skills could be running faster, or running, grasping, or holding, or lifting something. That is a gross motor skill. And the fine motor skills is drawing something, holding a pencil, the precision and the focus in doing certain difficult, complex, or the task which needs very much of the attention in doing that. Let's move towards the exercise particular for that age. In exercise, when we are discussing, that plays an important role in the growth and development of this age, as the percentage of children involved in the daily programs in school decreased from 80% to 20% in those 2 years. In 1969, it was too much of the daily programs or the daily physical activity, but until 1999, it has decreased significantly. And if we are going to have the ratings of nowadays, then it is going to be drastically be much lower than 20%, because now with the use of a lot of screen times and the television and all of those indoor activities, the children are very much restricted and are having the sedentary lifestyle, which is which make them mentally fatigued but not physically consume all their energies which are required to be used. So the best way to do and to make the children more active and use their physical capabilities is to get them involved into aerobic exercises. Aerobic exercises are any exercises which involve increased breathing and the heart rate, like walking, running, playing, and something like that. That is going to help them in that age, because if they are not involved in those activities or the physical consumption of their energy, then they are going to have very serious disadvantages in their physical development. Let's talk about health, illness, and disease, which is very much linked with their exercise routine as well, which I have discussed earlier. In the middle and late childhood, this is the best time when they are most healthy, because this is a time in which they are not very much prone to get a lot of diseases. So it is the excellent time for their health conditions. But in this age, the accidents and the injuries used to increase because they are very much healthy and they are involved in a lot of other activities. Then when we discuss the injuries, that is the leading cause of death during the middle and late childhood, and the most prominent cause of injuries in that is the motor vehicle accidents, because in this age they are going to get out of their homes or used to be free and are going to be more independent and without supervision as well. As we discussed in the exercise portion of our discussion right now, the overweight children is the cause of that when the lifestyle is going to be too much sedentary. The one cause of that is this thing, and the other thing is their diet and their nutrition, which is going to be not that much balanced in this age, which is going to cause the overweight cause the children to have the problems of obesity as an adult as well. The girls are more likely than boys to be overweight, and the changes in the diet and total caloric intake may be one reason for increase in obesity rates. As we have discussed, the nutrition and nutrients and the food and the diet is going to have an important influence in that. Then the changes, then as we can see that the body mass index, which is computed on the basis of height and weight of the child, used to give us the rating on the computed formula, or that if the child is obese, overweight, or at the risk of being overweight. When the child is overweight and it is his BMI is not that much appropriate, then the risks of having cardiovascular diseases, psychological medical problems, bullying, low self-esteem, depression, peer pressure, respiratory problems, and the sleep apnea, diabetes, high blood pressure, these are the problems the child can experience in that early age. When we talk about certain diseases of the late childhood, there are cardiovascular diseases and the cancer. So these are the most prominent diseases which can occur in this stage, as we have discussed that this age is very much least likely to have some sort of getting some sort of diseases very easily. But cardiovascular diseases, as we have discussed, that it is not that much common, but in it they have already possesses the risk factor in having the cardiovascular diseases. Then cancer, as we can say that it is the second leading cause of death in children 5 to 14 years of age, and there are certain different types of cancer as well. So now we are talking about and discussing the children with disabilities, and we are talking about, specifically about the age range of late childhood, right? When we were discussing the physical development, and now we have moved towards the psychological or any sort of disabilities the child used to go through. So when we talk about the percentage in that, the specific learning disabilities are the highest prevalent in that particular age. Then the speech and language impairment, mental retardation, and emotional disturbance. We can see that emotional disturbance is not the major part in that age range, but as they are going to move towards the adolescence age, so the emotional disturbance is usually used to escalate in them. These disturbances used to escalate in that. When we talk about specifically about the learning disabilities, then it is that Then it says that learning disabilities are any sort of disabilities in which the person is unable to understand, comprehend, or to grasp the information by through writing, reading, and all those skills which need some sort of cognitive abilities, as well as the learning of that particular thing. In learning disabilities, we have three main categories which we are going to discuss shortly. And the learning disabilities are actually higher in number in boys than girls, and there are three things which used to define the learning disability in a person. The first thing is the IQ level, the which we can say intelligence quotient as well, that is used to determine the learning disability. The second most important thing and the component in determining learning disability is the significant difficulty in a school related area. Any school related area, either that could be reading, writing, spelling, comprehension, and whatever that thing is, any difficulty in that school related area. And the last thing is that it must be exclusively happening as a learning disability, rather than it is the part of some other emotional problem, any other barrier like second language background, or any other neurological deficit. So it must be exclusive of all those dimensions, then we can say that it is a learning disability. As we have discussed that there are three different types of learning disability. The first is dyslexia, then dysgraphia, and dyscalculia. And the dyslexia is, first we can discuss dyslexia, in which the person and the individual with its impairment, it is very difficult for them to read or spell the things. They are unable to correctly read the alphabets because they are unable to recognize them effectively, and they are unable to when they are unable to recognize and comprehend and understand and learn those letters, then it is very difficult for them to spell those letters and those words as well. Then when we talk about dysgraphia, as its name says, graphia, so we can link that with the handwriting, right? So the learning disability that involves difficulty in handwriting is related to dysgraphia. And the last is dyscalculia. The calculation we can associate it with the arithmetic or computations or mathematical calculations or processes. So these are the three main types of learning disabilities we have discussed so far. So when we discuss about the possible causes of these, then the first thing is always that there is a genetic predisposition of that. Then there are environmental influences. If the environment is too much harsh, or there are no opportunities available for the person or the individual to acquire those skills of reading, writing. For example, we can say that in a very remote areas, or in the areas where education is not that much prevalent, or the resources or opportunities are not that much available, then we can say that in those areas the person is unable to attain that level of computation, mathematics, reasoning, or we can say reading, spelling, comprehension. So these things, if the opportunity is not available in that area, so it is not that the person is unable to do that, but the opportunity was not given, so he is not ready to learn all those things. Then we can say that there is a problem in the neurological functioning, the multiple regions in the brain which are going to function for that part. There must be some neurological deficit, some sort of physical damage, or some sort of any deficiency in there. So now we are moving towards the attention deficit hyperactivity syndrome, and that is a disorder in DSM-5 as well, and it was recognized as a disorder long before in all DSM in the previous DSM versions as well. When we talk about ADHD, it is the disability in which children are usually having three different conditions. The first is either they are going to be inattentive, or they could be hyperactive, and the third component is impulsivity. In the new DSM-5 category, the kid needs to be either inattentive or hyperactive, so both conditions are going to meet the criteria of ADHD disorder. Inattention is that the person is unable to focus on one thing and they are bored with the task after a few minutes. That inattention, we can say that the person is unable to focus. For example, if you are reading your book and you need focus and attention to do that. And if that person is having some sort of ADHD traits or ADHD symptoms, then it will be very difficult for them to focus on that particular task for a longer period of time to finish a paragraph or even 1 to 2 lines. So that is the case in inattention. The second is hyperactivity. In the hyperactivity, the person is involved, the individual is involved in overactivity, overexhaustion or overactivity. We can say increased activity in the individual, in which for example, they in that age they are coming inside, they are going outside, they are coming in one room and then they are shifting their rooms, they are moving across the rooms and all this. So this is a hyperactivity. The impulsivity is difficulty in giving the action. The impulsivity is something spontaneous, something out of the blue, they are going to start doing those things. So now we are going to discuss the emotional and behavioral disorders. As we are discussing these, there are certain disorders which are coming under the psychological domain. So these are all those disorders which come under the psychiatric and psychological conditions. First, the emotional and behavioral disorder. As we can see and we can anticipate that these are going to be those problems which are having some sort of emotional aspect in them, and the things that we can say, the aggression, depression, fears, phobias, and all these things, the conflicts, the problem that persist within the relationships, within the interpersonal functioning, within the interpersonal interactions and communications, and which are associated with the school and the personal matters, like within the family domain and with the peer relationship as well as there are socio-emotional characteristics, right? So we can discuss under this domain the emotional and behavioral disorders. The next are autism spectrum disorder. When we talk about the autism spectrum disorder, as DSM-5 has integrated number of disorders under the autism spectrum disorder. In all the pervasive developmental disorder which were in DSM-4 are now under the domain of autism spectrum disorder, and Asperger syndrome, which was a separate category in DSM-4, is now combined under autism spectrum disorder, because Asperger syndrome was very much misdiagnosed before as well. So the autism spectrum disorder usually had that sort of characteristic which was very much problematic, in which autism is just not related to the mental retardation or the low intelligence level as well. We can say that in autism as well that there are individuals who have the average intelligence as well. The problems including in the autism spectrum disorder are related to the social interaction, verbal and non-verbal communication, and the repetitive behavior we talk about. Autistic disorders, as we have discussed before, that their onset is in the first 3 years of life, and it includes the deficiencies in the social relationships, abnormalities in the communication, and restrictive or repetitive stereotype patterns of behavior. So these are the main domains of the autistic disorders and autism spectrum disorder, in which the abnormalities are in the communication. For example, a child with autistic disorder is going to have disturbed relationship. They are unable to like it, they don't like that other people are going to approach them or physically touch them, and there are certain sensations which they are very much sensitive about certain sensations, and those sensations are, if present in their environment, they are going to be very much disturbed and very much reactive towards those. So in social relationship, we can say that they are weak because they are unable to assess the social cues in the environment. They are unable to assess the facial expression or emotional understanding of the other person, because they are not involved in that much, or in they are not that much interested or have developed communication skills as well. And as well as they are restricted and repetitive. When we talk about restricted and repetitive patterns and stereotype patterns of behavior, which means that if they like one pair of t-shirts or one pair of socks, so they are going to repeatedly having that same thing or same routine. For example, if they used to wake up at certain time and they used to have some certain meal for their breakfast, they are not going to move that or change that type of breakfast from their routine, and they are going to be very much restricted into that. And repetitive, we can say that in the repetitive way of behaving is that they are unable to change their routine, and they, as we have said before, that they are repetitive and restricted in their patterns of behavior, that whatever they are doing, they are going to do that persistently. The next one is Asperger syndrome. As we are talking about Asperger, that is the relatively mild autism spectrum disorder, in which the child has relatively good verbal language, mild non-verbal language problems, and a restricted range of interest and relationship. In this, the problems are not that much apparent, but they are surely over there, as all those symptoms which we have discussed before are there, but they are on the milder level. There are non-verbal language problems, but they are mild as well, and there is a restricted range of interest in relationship. As we have talked about, that they are not interested in the social interactions and the relationship. When we talk about the causes of emotional and behavioral disorders, then the genetics are the main cause, then the brain dysfunction or neurological dysfunctioning, and the last mutation we can say is the missing or duplicated pieces of DNA on chromosome 16, usually the cause of these emotional or behavioral disorders. So, as we are discussing the educational issues now of the late childhood, in 1975 there was a law which was passed for all the public schools to help deal with the issues which were experienced in those times for the children with disabilities. That law was passed actually for the Education of All Handicapped Children Act. Under that act, and regarding that, all students with the disabilities were given free and appropriate public education. And in that law, there were these few ideas and these few rules which have been processed to help deal with those issues which were experienced in those times. The individualized educational plan was introduced, which was a written statement which was used according to the individual needs of the child with disability, which was according to the requirements and the deficiency in that particular individual, and that child was used to be taken care according to that individualized education plan, which was based on his or her own deficiencies related to that. Then the next thing was least restrictive environment, LRE, and it was actually for those settings that is as similar as possible, to make the setting as similar as possible to that of a non-disabled children, which means that the setting was made as much of the inclusive type of education as it was possible for the children with minor or milder disabilities, that they can learn even better and they can have better opportunities and chances to learn the information and to learn the knowledge which the non-disabled children are having the opportunity to learn. And then the third was the inclusion, in which the children with mild disabilities again, or with the mild mental retardation, they were placed and they were given the chance to be in a regular school setting or in a regular classroom settings, so it could have helped them in their learning. Then when we are moving towards the cognitive changes, then there is a theory which we are discussing throughout all the stages, that is Piaget's cognitive developmental theory. And in that, the child of who is around 7 to 11 years of age, they lie under the concrete operational stage. And in that stage, as we all know, that the concrete operations are going to now work on in that stage. Before this stage, the child was egocentric, and he was unable to differentiate, understand logical reasoning, and all those complex cognitive functioning. But in the age of 7 to 11 years, now things are coming logically sound, and the reasoning is coming into the front foot of the cognitive changes in the children. Now children can perform concrete operations, and they are good in their logical and reasoning abilities as well, which is helping them to deal their environment more systematically and more logically, and giving more reasons, and having more imagination, and having the power of imagination, which is helping them to resolve certain queries and certain complexities and certain operations. Now they can make things happen in their imagination, which means that now they don't have to execute everything to learn about the consequences of that thing or to know what is going to happen if they are going to do that. As they are going to reach the age of 7 to 8 years, most of the children are able to answer if the things are being changed in appearance and not in the quantity. For example, if we are saying that a children is presented with the clay, one is in the round shape and one is flattened in a rectangular shape, then before late childhood the children were not able to identify if the quantity is going to be same or different in different appearance. They used to say that whichever length is going to be longer, they are going to say that this is having the more quantity. But now as they have moved towards 7 to 8 years of age, now they can answer that if the amount of the clay is same in a ball shape and in a rectangular or pencil shape. So this is what the operation has advanced in them, and they have this type of imagination which involves reversible mental actions, and they can apply these reversible mental actions, and they can rewind those things, and they can have everything in their imagination. And in concrete operational stage, which also allows the children to consider several characteristics rather than focus on the single property of an image. As we have discussed earlier, that now they are focused on not only on the appearance of the thing but also the quantity of that thing and the weight and the height of that particular thing. Next, when we talk about the seriation, that seriation is the ability to order stimuli along with the quantitative dimension, which means that the now child is able to make things serialize. For example, if someone asks them to place some sticks in different length on a table, and they are asked that they have to put the sticks in a row, that the larger or the biggest stick is on the first place, and then the smaller and smaller and smaller. So in the stages before this late childhood, the children are unable to have that to serialize or seriation process in place. They are going to place all the sticks on the basis of their haphazard organization. But in this seriation, they are able to understand the length of each stick, and then they are going to place in a serial order, one by one, the biggest at one end, and then the smaller than that next to it, and the smaller than that next to it. So this is seriation, that they have the ability to identify the quantitative dimensions. Then when we talk about transitivity, that is that they logically combine relations to understand certain conclusions, which means that they are able to understand the relation and logical connection between those things. For example, if we are talking about those sticks, then we can say that there are 3 sticks, and these 3 sticks are having different sizes. Then they can say that stick number 1 is larger than stick number 2, and stick number 2 is larger than stick number 3, and they can evaluate from this that the stick number 2 is longer than stick number 3, and so they can conclude that stick number 1 is longest than stick number 3 as well. So this is how their reasoning is going on, and they are having the advanced skills in that. Then when we talk about the classification is that they are able to move the things up and down in the hierarchy, or they can understand the relation, and they can classify them into different groups and hierarchies, or in different characteristics, or in different stages. For example, if we talk about their family tree or their generational tree, so they are able to classify their grandparents, then their family, then their parents, and then he himself and their siblings as well, and then the children of his or her siblings as well. So this is how they can classify, as we can see in the table over here, that they can move things up and down, and they understand this classification system as well. Now let's move towards another cognitive concept or the perspective. We have discussed the Piaget's perspective. Now we are moving towards the information processing perspective, which is talking about the memory domain. It is very much focused on the memory functioning, because in this stage, as long as short-term memory has been changing drastically in the early childhood, but after 7 to 8 years of age, there is no such change in the short-term memory. So now we are going to talk about the long-term memory more, because there are some changes and the strategies which are being used, which are helping the child in late childhood to learn better, to memorize better, to retain better, and to utilize that knowledge and expertise in his or her life experiences. So the long-term memory reflects the children's increased knowledge, and their increased use of strategies helps them to have more expertise. When we talk about their knowledge and expertise, then their expertise are now going to be more extensive, as they have acquired extensive knowledge about a particular content area, and this knowledge influences what they notice and how they organize, represent, or interpret information. For example, if they are learning something, then they, with every attempt or with every revision of that, they are getting more and more knowledge about that thing, and they are getting more and more expertise in doing that. So we can say that all children usually have more expertise about a subject than a younger children do. There was an experiment and there was a study and research which was done on 10 to 11 years old children. They were experienced in chess play. They were experienced in playing chess. So they were asked to memorize some sort of information about the chess. Then when they were playing with the college students who were not very experienced players of the chess, then it was noticed that those who were experiencing chess, when they were given that new information to memorize, they were better in memorizing that information than those college students who were older than them, but they were unable to memorize that information as much good as the children of 10 to 11 years old. Which is why we can say that the expertise in a given field or in a given skill make them memorize things better and better in the long-term memory. So when we talk about the strategies which are being used to improve their long-term memory, and which helps them to retain and remember information in a more refined manner, then there are few strategies which we can discuss about that. The first thing is that when these children of the late childhood are encouraged to engage in the mental imagery, this really helps them, because in this stage they are creating pictures in their memory and in their imagination, and they used to memorize things in the form of pictures and the visual stimuli. Second thing we can do is that we can encourage or motivate them to remember the material, then rather than rote memorizing it or just memorizing that thing for the sake of that portion or that knowledge. They are going to when they are going to understand or practically apply that thing or a concept, then they are better able to do that. For example, when we are discussing any of these concepts, when this is given in a theoretical way, it is very hard for you to retain, or maybe you will need rote memorization to retain that information which we are discussing. But as soon as I give you any one example from a practical experience or from a child's imaginative or example or study, then it is better able for then you are better able to understand that information as well. For example, if we are talking about as we have been talking about the strategies, mental strategies, and the long-term memory and the short-term memory, when I gave you that study of 10 to 11 years old children, it was better you are better able to memorize that concept. So this is what that we have to make the concepts and ideas clear to them, and we have to give them examples and the meaning of that concept that will help them to memorize it better. The next strategy is that we can always repeat the instructions with the variation. The variation in the instructions are going to help them learn the information more effectively, and it will clarify their concepts more thoroughly. Because the increased number of association in the memory storage and linking expands the network of association in the memory storage as well. Lastly, we can discuss that when we are embedding some sort of memory or some sort of knowledge in them, then the memory relevant language is going to help them acquire that knowledge in a very good manner. We can say that it will help them because when we are using some sort of specific shortcuts which have been used already, then those shortcuts may embed that specific information into that confinement. For example, when you are using your um, mobile phone or your laptop, then you are having some software on your laptop and your mobile phone as well, but sometimes you just create their shortcuts on the home screen or on the desktop. Why you do that? Because accessing that specific application or that specific software from a computer or a mobile phone is easily accessible when you are creating those shortcuts. So mnemonics are actually the devices, we can say they are the shortcuts we usually use. So if those chunks or those hints are being used everywhere when the same concepts or similar to that concept is being taught, then it is going to help them to learn that specific concept easily. Then let's move towards the fuzzy trace theory. Fuzzy trace theory says that the memory is best understood by considering two types of memory presentation. One is verbatim memory trace and the second is gist. As the children is going to get older and older, they are going to start extracting gist, which is going to help them learn more and improve their memory. For example, the younger children usually are focused on the verbatim memory trace, which is that they precisely memorize everything in detail of that particular information, but gist is the idea or the concept or the meaning or the true understanding of that particular thing they get out of that. That's why as the child is going older and older, they are going to extracting more of the gist thing from the information, which is going to help them improve their memory. And we can see that in early elementary school years, children begin to use gist, and according to this theory, this contributes to their improved memory as well. Lastly, we can discuss about intelligence as well. Then intelligence is like the problem-solving skills and the ability to learn from and adapt to everyday life. Individual differences, stable, consistent ways in which people are different from each other, and that is what intelligence is. That intelligence helps every individual to learn better, to adjust better into their own situations. So in early as we have discussed in early childhood, and now we are discussing in the late childhood, that in late childhood the intelligence is going to be more on the logical and reasoning level, and their intelligence is more refined, and they are able to use their problem solving skills much better in their everyday life. And intelligence is going to determine that how quickly they are going to grasp the concept from their environment, and this is going to help them in their consistently resolving their issues in their life. So that was all about the physical and cognitive development of late childhood.